Development Agency wants laws banning alcohol advertising to actually be fast-tracked. It follows the death of 21 teenagers at NYDA Tavern in East London on Sunday morning. The agency also wants a speedy probe into the tragedy that we've all, of course, heard of by now. And of course, for more on this, I'm now joined by NYDA CEO Wasim Karim. Wasim, thank you so much for your time and good morning to you. It seems you're of the view that alcohol advertising has played a role, and I suppose not only in the tragic events that we have seen this past weekend of the 21 teenagers losing their lives, but in overall the consumption of young people, the extent with which young people seem to be comfortable with consuming or even abusing alcohol. Is that your stance?
Yeah, thanks, Tumelo. And I think, first off, we must offer condolences to all of the victims' families for this really a senseless tragedy that has happened, And I think similar, if you think about gun violence in the United States, one needs to look at a collective response to why these incidents keep on happening, in our statement, we referred to the fact that, when I was at school 20 years ago, there was a nightclub tragedy in Chatsworth, and then a similar incident where young girls as young as 13 were in a nightclub and died in a stampede, and we have to ask ourselves, the collective question is to say, why does this keep happening in South Africa? Why is there this fascination with alcohol? And I think COVID-19 also showed us the sort of disastrous relationship that South Africans seem to have with alcohol. So I think more regulation around the sale of alcohol, the advertising of it, the glorification of it on our television screens needs to be considered. I think the licensing requirements for taverns and nightclubs and how they are regulated and how they allow young people, because this is certainly not an isolated incident. We know that almost every weekend this is happening somewhere, and we're playing with fire with our young people on an almost weekend basis. I think what we're calling for is really a collective response, is to say these young people cannot die in vain. We cannot have this sort of senseless tragedy happen again in South Africa.
Yeah, the same questions you talk of now, Wasim, are those also being, posed to the owner of the tavern, the NYDA Tavern, to say, how is it that your security, your staff, or even yourselves allow teenagers as young as 13 years old to come and not only buy alcohol from your establishment, but to stay in your establishment and continue to consume it under your watch? I had an opportunity to speak to an eyewitness just yesterday who said it seemed that the teenagers had their own pens down, activity elsewhere, and they then heard that, the tavern was closing late. They decided to bring their party there. What accountability should be taken here by, liquor store owners, shebeen owners, tavern owners, etc., when it comes to managing young children's, buying and, movement even of alcohol within taverns?
Yeah, look, I think tavern owners and liquor boards and the SAPS have a huge level of accountability to play here, right? Because they have responsibility to conduct their business in an ethical and a compliant way. And I think if there's any proof that there was wrongdoing, the full might of the law must deal with these institutions, right? But I also think that this is not limited to tavern owners, right? I think there is a massive alcohol lobby in South Africa, that goes right up to the top of business organizations which lobby at platforms like NADLAC. You just need to think of the response, for example, when we had the alcohol bans during COVID-19 and this heavy response from business, to say this is killing economic activity, but economic activity at what risk, at what risk to South Africa's children, And I think it goes right up to alcohol producers, who have created a supply chain where alcohol is present deep into every single community in South Africa. And I think that the alcohol lobby in South Africa needs to take a long, hard look at itself and look at whether no one is banning the sale of alcohol in South Africa, but I think they need to look at themselves and whether they're cultivating enough socio-economic programs that alcohol is consumed in a responsible way in the country, in a way that protects young children, that protects young women from gender-based violence, And then I really think that that sort of conversation and regulation is critical at this point in time.
Yeah. You also mentioned as the NYDA calling for more, police visibility, questioning as well throughout these investigations why enough policing is not, done not only at eNyobeni Tavern, but many other taverns that we may not report of now. What role do you think community members, families, parents can also equally play in policing and making sure that they do report such incidents, but also that they do talk to young people about the dangers of alcohol?
Yeah, look, I think if you look at this thing, it's a collective failure of society, right? It's a failure on the part of families, on communities, on government, and I think that we need to play a much better role in allowing young people to be able to channel their energies, right? And I also think that we should not separate what happens from the deep-seated poverty, inequality challenges that we face in the country, right? And that, home is not a happy place for many young people when homes are poverty-stricken, yeah? And sometimes we don't give young people enough outlets for their energies, right? We don't give them community youth centers. We don't give them sports facilities where they have areas to channel their energies when they're young. Yeah? So I think that society as a whole needs to take a look at how we handle situations like this, right? And I think communities have a huge role to play when we know these kind of things happen in our communities and we don't report them. Then we also can't blame government, when these sort of incidents happen. So I do think that the country as a whole needs to collectively ask itself about how we stop something like this ever happening again, and stop putting our young people's lives at risk.
Yeah, and I appreciate you speaking to us this morning, Wasim Karim, the NYDA CEO, of course, joining us right here on the South African Morning about the tragedy that occurred out in East London. 21 teenagers losing their lives inside eNyobeni Tavern.